We are all tourists. We are all tourists. We are all passengers on this road of life. Walking through the wilderness, where all these things around us are temporary. Even ourselves, our very lives, are temporary. A mere moment in the eyes of God. We are all passengers. And throughout this journey, I've heard it said, everything is practice. Everything is practice. Everything that we do. There's no such thing as perfection. Only progress. Just progress, not perfection. My friend Jason is a yoga instructor. And many years ago, I was in his class, and at the end of his yoga practice, all of us, we were laying on the floor on our mats, and we were meditating after our yoga practice. It was in a pose, it's called Savasana, which is just laying on our backs and allowing ourselves to cool down. And Jason walked amongst us, and as he did it, he said to all of us in a very calm tone, everything is practice. Everything is practice. Everything is practice. And not just that yoga practice for that day. For all things that we do, everything is practice. Working toward something else. Never toward perfection, but to more experiences in our own lives, where we'll never be perfect. Because that's not what it's about on this long road of life, where all things, where everything is temporary, even the road itself. Now, I want you to imagine two mountains for me. On the one side, this is the mountain of the Transfiguration, where Jesus was transfigured before only a few of his disciples. And before them, his clothes became like white, dazzling light. His face was like the sun. And then the other mountain is Golgotha, the place of the cross where Christ was crucified. And between these mountains is the wilderness. And that's where we are. That is where we are journeying. That is where we are but passengers in this temporary existence of ours. Now, as we start the season of Lent, we begin on that first mountain, the mountain of the Transfiguration. And as we heard today, Jesus journeyed to the top with only a few of his disciples. Peter, James, and John went to the top of this mountain. And there before them, Jesus was transfigured. He was transformed before them. White, dazzling light. And as he was there, he met with Moses and with Elijah. And Peter was so excited at what he saw. He said, "Lord, it is so good for us to be here, but I will build 3 dwellings for you. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Let's live here," he's saying. "Let's make this our temple. Let's make this a place that we can call home." And as he is saying this, a voice comes from the clouds, and it is the voice of the Lord as he says to them, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." And the disciples, they were terrified. Anyone would have been terrified to hear the voice of the Lord coming from a cloud. And then Jesus went to them, told them to not be afraid. And they looked up. And this was not their transfigured Lord anymore. This was just their friend Jesus, who they had climbed the mountain with. And as they descended, Jesus instructed them. I know what you witnessed. The world isn't ready to hear it yet. You are to tell no one of what you saw until after the Son of Man is raised from the dead. Now, I doubt the disciples had any idea what Jesus was talking about. The Son of Man has been raised from the dead. The Son of Man was with them right there. Jesus the Christ was with them right there. Right there, Jesus was giving them a foretaste of things to come. Jesus was giving them a description of the second mountain of the cross. The mountain that they were journeying to next. Which is why they couldn't stay. The journey wasn't over. They needed to continue. And of course, Peter didn't understand. As Peter said, "Let us build 3 dwelling places." He saw Jesus and Peter wanted to hold on to that moment. He wanted to hold on to it forever. He wanted to hold on to Jesus. Maybe just make Jesus his very own, that he wouldn't have to share. But that's not what that moment was about. And that's not what the light of the gospel is about. That transforming, transfiguring light of Christ is not meant to stay in one place. As we travel on this road, all of us, tourists, all of us, passengers, this light, this is the light that needs to be shared with all whom we meet. And when we share that light with one another, then it illuminates the world. For anyone who's been to our Christmas Eve service, the candlelight service, or any candlelight service, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Where at the end of the service, when we sing Silent Night together, and we are all holding candles, how are the candles lit? They are lit by one flame. The flame from the Christ candle. From that one flame of Christ, the next candle is lit. And from that candle, the next candle. And from that candle, the next. And so it goes. Until that light fills the sanctuary. Or I want you to picture in your minds a pitch black room. A room where no light can come in. And in this room it is filled with candles. And entering that room with a single flame. And from one candle lighting the next, to the next candle to the next, until it illuminates the entire room. That is how the light of Christ is spread among us. from one person to the next. But as I said, all this, all things, everything, it's all temporary. Even those candles, every candle will eventually be extinguished. Every candle will eventually burn down, so it holds no light. So all we can do is throughout our lives on this journey is to light the next candle, and the next one, and the next one. The next person that we meet, with the next experience that we have, to carry that light of Christ as we travel from one mountain to the next. The mountain of the Transfiguration, which is the mountain where we get to see Jesus Christ as who he really is, as God among us. And then the mountain of the cross, where we get to see Jesus Christ as who we need him to be. Our Savior, our salvation, whose death brought the end to our death, to our sin, to our struggle. And there will be so many crosses in our own lives. There isn't just that one cross at the end. We all know trial. We all know struggle. Every single one of us. Some of us feel like there are those who feel like all they do is go from one struggle to the next in this journey of life. But it is that light of Christ that lifts us up, that helps us to keep going, to be with others, that when mine burns too low, they can light mine again. And as I'm speaking of this temporary life that we share, there is so much wisdom that I receive from our young people. There seems to be a week of that in our children's sermons. And on our Wednesday night service, I'm doing my children's sermon, and the young lady I'm talking to is not having it at all. She wants to do her own thing, which is fine, you know. It's part of the joy of the children's sermon. And she looks over and she notices that I have I've got this tattoo on my wrist here. It's of an arrow. And she asks me, "What is that?" I said, "Oh, that's an arrow." Like, "Oh, that's an arrow." And she goes, "Oh, is it temporary?" And I said, "Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Because all of this is temporary. Everything is temporary. The lives that we live, that we share with one another, it's a road that leads to the kingdom that God has prepared for us, that waits for us in this temporary life that we have now. A life that is such a gift, that we are meant to share it with such complete joy. And yes, there are crosses. Yes, there are trials. Like even the reason, like the purpose of like having the arrow right there is that, what does an arrow do? It has to go backwards in order to go forwards. And so much of that can be our existence with one another. Through our trials. As we approach the mountain of the cross where Christ is revealed as we need him to be, the one who died so that we will never die. But the joy of the light that guards us and guides us is beyond that mountain, overshadowing everything, is the mountain of God, the mountain of our eternal salvation, the salvation that guides us every day. That as we journey there as tourists, as passengers, we will return. We will return to our home, where we are passengers, where it's our kingdom with the Christ.